It was beautiful, his perspective, and a lot of vulnerability too, in how he's experienced a lot of hate for being Jewish from Christians, because Christians that he had encountered had essentially planned it out or laid it out that like Jews were the reason why Jesus died. I think the takeaway from that for me is this idea where it's like there's something as a Christian where when you can unlock the ability to love people, just stuff happens. I don't know how else to explain it. Stuff happens. He's like, you're fun. You're easy to be around. Obviously, y'all know I believe something different than you do, yet you still love me.
This week on the Reach Podcast. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Reach Podcast. I am here today with Isaac McKe. Isaac is a returning guest on the podcast, and Isaac is on Search Ministries staff in Dallas, Texas, doing amazing work. So, Isaac, thanks for being back, man.
Of course.
You got a good story for us today?
I think I do. I think I got a really good one.
Okay, set it up. What are we going to talk about?
I'll set it up. I think the overarching topic of this conversation is never underestimate who you're around.
Okay.
And I think to set this up, so I work in Search Dallas, and we work in a community office center. So simply, there's just a lot of people in one building that have their own cubicles.
A big co-working space.
A co-working space.
Yeah.
That's probably a better way to say it. And the beauty of this, it's especially for our job and what we get to do and what we're blessed to do, is we're making relationships. So we know essentially everybody that's in every single hall, and when we go and get coffee, you're talking to somebody. And we actually do what we call Search Formations, which is a 12-week apologetic course in our office. So there's a conference room, and we do it every Tuesday and Thursday. And at this point, we've been doing it there so long that everybody knows it's happening. So it's like we'll have leftover food. Everybody's like, where's the food at? All this fun stuff. But we had this guy that is working in this co-working spot that we did not know anything about him really. And it usually happens this way. And like I said, I think this just goes back to how awesome God is. But when we're done, people will come up and just be like, hey, what are y'all doing? Like for those of them that don't know what we're doing. And our pitch is always, hey, grab food and come see. That's always our pitch. And sometimes we'll actually tell them what we're doing. But sometimes we're just like, free food.
Even though I should say this curriculum is really designed for believers to learn how to share their faith.
Absolutely.
But you guys you've had some interesting experiences just inviting anybody in.
And I think this is going to be one of those.
Okay.
So yeah, to preface that.
Well, I hope it's good because we're telling it on a podcast, so I hope it's interesting.
Yeah, to preface it, the goal of this class is to equip you to share your faith. But sometimes we're just like, we never know. Like that, to us, it might be, I wouldn't maybe say a sign, but maybe it's just, this is cool timing. Like somebody's coming across and they want to know what we're doing. Maybe the topic today about the resurrection or the crucifixion might touch them in a way that they hadn't been touched. So we have this guy, he comes up, and I'm not going to name him, but he's like, hey, what are y'all doing? And we're like, hey, you should come in. We have free lunch, which, like I said, is always the pitch. Everybody wants free lunch. And he's like, sees the screen, and it's cool because we have our food on the right, and then you could see the screen, and it says, we were talking about the resurrection. So he automatically kind of had an idea of what was happening. He says, oh, I'm Jewish. And we're like, so? And he's like, first of all, he was really caught off guard. He was like thinking, oh, you're Jewish, or I'm Jewish, you're Christian, not going to work. But he ended up coming into the class, and we're sitting there during resurrection, and we're having dialogue. He's not really saying anything. And then out of the blue, he speaks. And he's like, hey, by the way, I'm Jewish. And then goes on and it was beautiful. Like just his perspective and a lot of vulnerability too, and how he's experienced a lot of hate for being Jewish from Christians, because the Christians that he had encountered had essentially planned it out or laid it out that like Jews were the reason why Jesus died, all this stuff, a lot of anti-Semitism there, which was in a room full of, remember, you're equipping believers. And then you have this guy that's Jewish that goes on this really amazing and beautiful explanation on his experiences, especially with Christians, but also just his faith. And this guy ends up coming the whole 12 weeks.
Really?
So yeah, I think maybe he missed maybe one, but he came the whole time.
Did you guys make him do the review ever?
we tried. We actually did. So we go through the reliability of Scripture, and obviously Jewish, you know your Old Testament or should know your Old Testament, and he did very well. So we actually had him do that, but it was cool too because you get to experience. Like I said, this is a room full of believers, so you're hearing from a Jewish guy that has a lot of interesting and applicable applications, especially when you're talking about the Old Testament. Like he knows his stuff. He's understanding the laws and Jewish customs. And when we get to archaeology, he's like, yeah, I know that place, or I know this when we're talking about Israel and all this awesome stuff. But obviously he's Jewish, so there's still some divide when we're talking about resurrection. And he's like, yeah, I don't know about that part. But what I want to point out is the fact that he came the whole time, which is one of those where when you put on something like this and you kind of, I'm gonna call this a curveball in the sense of it's not a person that is really designated to go through the class. You're kind of expecting, okay, there might be, when we get into really deep Christian topics. I'm gonna say spiritual, but also Christian topics, right? Like, is Jesus the only way? So when you have a Jewish guy sitting there hearing these, there's always a fear of, okay, maybe he's going to stand up and be like, you're wrong. Everybody's wrong here. But he didn't. He was super respectful and super nice. But we're having all of these conversations throughout these 12 weeks, and then we get to the last week, and this is kind of the conversation I want to focus on a little bit. We get to the end of the 12 weeks, and at the end of the 12 weeks, we do like a commissioning lunch. So it's really just hey, thank you so much for what y'all have done. And this is really our send-off for the believers to be like, hey, we've given you 12 weeks of learning about the Christian faith, maybe some of these really hard apologetic questions that a lot of people have. Now, let's go. Let's talk about it with people. And also, it's a time to kind of reflect. Be like, hey, what have y'all enjoyed? What has been times throughout this that maybe you've had a conversation about things we talked about, all this stuff. So it's happening. Everybody's given their stint. And then we have our Jewish guy stand up. And we were like, okay, we have no idea what's going to be said. We're like, this could be, hey, you're sweet, cool. But he said something that, I mean, and it's kind of funny because our whole office gets emotional every single time we talk about it, because he stands up. And like I said, this guy's been coming for 12 weeks. He's very adamant about his faith in Judaism. He stands up, he says, I just want y'all to know that the only perspective I had of Christians before meeting y'all was the ones on the radio that own private jets. And he says, I want y'all to know that y'all have completely changed my perspective on Christians.
Wow.
And it just went silent. And we were like, whew. And I think the takeaway from that for me is this idea where it's like, and I've said this on some of my other podcasts too, where first off, it's a process, but like there's something as a Christian where when you can unlock the ability to love people, just stuff happens. I don't know how else to explain it. Stuff happens. It's one of those, we didn't evangelize this guy. We weren't, hey, here's Jesus. I mean, obviously he's kind of hearing it from what we're talking about, but like just from what he was saying, then we got to talk after that a little bit one-on-one about why he thought that, like what it was. And he said that's what it was centered on. He's like, y'all are fun. Y'all are easy to be around. He's like, obviously y'all know I believe something different than you do, yet you still love me. And I think there's something about loving people. And I know seems very easy, but I think a lot of times in our culture, and especially the Christian culture, this idea of love is somewhat too connected with like harsh truth, where it's like, oh, hey, me loving you is just dumping truth on you and being like, oh, I love you, so I'm just going to give you all this information to deal with, instead of actually valuing the person and their opinions and their beliefs. And if it was one of those where as soon as he stood up and he was like, oh, here's what I believe, and we're just like, hey, I love you, but you're wrong, like the guy's never coming back. He's not. So that's kind of a little bit of the conversation that we had with him, and he's still in our office, and it's beautiful to check up and be like, hey, what do you think, and how are you? And he still passes by, he still gets food all the time. But
hey everyone, I'm so glad you're listening to the Reach podcast. Reach is brought to you by Search, a ministry that helps you share Jesus. If you like what you're hearing, you'll love the Reach series. The Reach series is our new self-paced video course that gives you what you need to build relationships and have conversations about Jesus in a way that fits you. It won't cost you anything, so check it out today at reachothers.org. Now, let's get back to the podcast.
But yeah, that's a little bit of it.
That's an awesome story, man. And when you think of like how somebody could implement some of the lessons that you're talking about, or just things that apply to this story, they might not be able to host something at or they're not teaching a formation curriculum, but how does this like really apply to somebody who might be listening to this podcast? Like what could they do different or just think different about?
Yeah. I think I'll stand by this, and this is something I say a lot. How we view people matters so much. So it's like in this, yes, not everybody's going to have the opportunity or the time to put on this massive apologetic formations class. But if you're sitting and you have a friend, or you have somebody that you're in an office space with, or your neighbor, maybe even a family member, maybe people that are around you, when you have conversations with them, like, they should know they're loved. Now, that doesn't mean you necessarily agree on everything. There might be clarity, but that doesn't mean that they get any hint of, I feel like we really mess up as Christians when somebody doesn't feel loved. So this is just one of those examples for, first off, look around. Like, I think the number one thing I hear from Christians, and I've fallen into this boat plenty of times, is I don't know any non-believers. And my first question back to them is, have you looked? Like, it's in one of these, this was just very organic for us. He came to us, so we're lucky with this. But whether it's your office, like I said, whether it's your neighbors, your family, where you work out at, where you play pickup basketball, like, we are constantly surrounded by people that think differently than us. And sometimes all it takes is just inviting them into a conversation. And then within that conversation, that's where, as a Christian, our ability to love and our ability to value who they are is just probably one of the most important things when we're learning how to share Jesus is, okay, how can this person feel valued? Because one of my bosses say this, and it's a thing that stuck with me too, is when you're friends, you can talk about anything. And I think my goal and what I would love for people to take from this is just, when you're friends with people, you can talk about this stuff. And then when we love them, you never know what the Lord's going to do.
No, I think that's really great. And what keeps coming to my mind is we've got to remember where we started with God. And in Romans 5, I think it is, but I remember Paul said that while we were still enemies, Christ died for us.
Yeah.
And so we were not like pretty good folks, and God goes, I want them on my team. They're doing, and has even worse language, but enemies pretty bad.
Yeah.
While we were still enemies, God showed his love in this way, that he did the most incomprehensible thing. We completely didn't, there's no shred of deserving.
Yeah.
This is the message we had to share, but sometimes when we think of how do we, now that we've experienced this kind of pretty radical love of God, how do we give that away? And I think that's also just as radical sometimes, maybe all the time.
Yeah.
So great point.
Yeah.
Really great
and
point.
There's a part of that too where, I mean, this is within the conversation, but also just for people listening, something personal is, you're not going to really be able to love somebody if you don't understand the love that's given to us.
Yeah.
And that's in Ephesians 5. And I think that's just something on my heart when I have these conversations. I think there's an overflow of joy when I truly experience the love of God and the love of Jesus. So when you're in these conversations, you're like, maybe I'm not feeling that, or maybe this is hard. It's not connecting or something. Like maybe sometimes, and it might not be, but maybe reflect. Maybe be like, hey, what is my relationship with the Lord look like? What is my acceptance of His love? Because I truly believe when we understand God's love for us, it's going to radiate to everyone else around us.
No, I mean, that's such a great point, and probably one we don't talk about enough on here, but the extent to which we know what God has done and how much He loves us, that we experience His grace and mercy, that we want to go share that with. It flows out of, I think of often sharing our faith, how it really does connect to that relationship, that we understand all the things you were talking about, and we feel them and we know them, and then you really can't help but tell people. Whereas, and I think this is unfortunately true of a lot of, I think any of us could fall into this and maybe do to some degree at times, but it's easy in the world we live in to think of God as, here the list of things, even as a Christian. Hey, but He wants you to do this. You got to do all this stuff. If you don't do that, He's kind of a little mad at you. If you do this, He's really happy with you. And it can just become real rigid and programmatic, or we can even read the Bible that way. And instead of really reading through the lens of the gospel, which I think is how we're supposed to do it. And so that's just the motivator. I mean, when we understand what God's done for us in Christ, I think it's really hard to keep your mouth shut about it.
And I think a lot of people will figure that out.
I think so too. I hope so.
I hope so. That's the hope.
We hope so.
That's why we do this.
So, well, Isaac, great conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for
being
me
here. Thanks for sharing it.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to the Reach Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. That'd be a good idea. Share it with a friend and leave us a review to help others find the podcast. Now, for more resources, please visit reachothers.org and follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and we'd love to hear from you.